What's going on, everybody, and welcome to yet another unknown episode of the Book Binge, where I'm doing yet another review that I don't actually know when the video is coming out for. But either way, let's just talk about the book, because you know the episode by the time you're seeing this. It's in the title and the description, even if I don't know it when I'm recording it. Let's just talk about a book that I read the first half of in 8th grade, never finished after that point, even though I remember loving what I read and remember really wanting to continue it, and then finally actually went ahead and reread the first half and finished the book several years later. There's not really a whole lot for me to talk to in terms of the introduction of the book, besides the fact that this translation that I read by Anthony Bonner was incredible, and I'm really sad that this guy doesn't have any translations of anything else, and let alone Jules Verne stuff. So I'm actually really upset about that, meaning that if I read any more Verne, it's not going to be with this sort of prose or this specific type of writing style, which is disappointing, but it is what it is. That's just the way of translations. But let's talk about very first thing, just jumping right into it with The Good of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. One of my favorite things about the book is the fact that it just has a ton of memorable moments. There are so many scenes that I still viscerally recall about this book, not just from the first half because of reading it in 8th grade and reading it early this year in 2023, although maybe this is coming out in 2024. It probably is actually not coming out till 2024, so it's probably been a year since I've read this, but I still viscerally remember a lot of stuff here. There's a lot of memorable scenery that is described. There's plenty of tense moments that are really easy to remember. There are tons of character interactions that are really memorable. And with that point, I would say that memorable characters is another great thing about the book. There's the narrator. There's Captain Nemo, obviously is a classic, but there's also the friends, the sort of shipmates of the main character that are also really memorable as well. They're all very distinct and very different from one another, and they're just very fun, and their interactions are always very cool. Like I said, interactions are fantastic, and part of this also comes to the conversation that is made, not just the way that the characters interact with each other, but what they talk about. A lot of this comes down to philosophy and other related conversations, and most of this comes down to Captain Nemo and the main character of the book. What is the main character's name? I don't remember off the top of my head. I remember what he's like, but I don't remember his name. Actually, the back of the book doesn't even say the main character's name, so that's fun. But either way, the interactions between the main character and other characters in a philosophical sense, but especially with Captain Nemo, are always fun. You get this sort of back and forth between two very different ideals of the world and very different ideals of humanity, and this sort of debate between them is always very interesting. Furthermore, the tone and the vibe of the story is very good, especially in the wonder of it all. Makes you feel as if you were actually there in the submarine with the characters. It's fantastic that way, and seeing the same scenery, experiencing these same things. There's very tense moments. One tense moment that takes place down in Antarctica, actually, that I'm not going to spoil the actual scene of, but I thought that scene was incredible, and I felt like I was there. I felt lightheaded like the characters did. It was really cool. In this sense, I would say that the book is very immersive to read, or at least it was for me. My translation, like I mentioned, by Anthony Bonner was very good. I'm sad the guy doesn't have any other translations, and especially not of Verne, because I'm going to read more Verne and not be able to read this version of it, which was quite good. In terms of the bad, I will say there are a couple things here that definitely belong in the bad. First off, the naming or the listing of naming biological classes and genuses and species can be a bit annoying and dry. And it happens at several points where it feels like it's multiple paragraphs. It's even a couple pages of this kind of very technical biological stuff, the marine biology aspect of it that isn't the most interesting, and maybe you start to glaze your eyes over. The first several times this happened, I didn't mind, but by the end of the book, anytime it would go into this long explanation of this this marine biology stuff, it would be like, okay, I'm going to skim past this until something relevant actually comes back up in a paragraph or two. But generally speaking, it wasn't enough to ruin the story. You could just skim over a paragraph or two like that. It's not really that important. That's more about the tone and the vibe of the story. It really makes it's more about the immersion in that case, but I could see it breaking the immersion. It did for me a couple times. Like I said, it's a little dry too occasionally, but it doesn't appear enough through the story to be like, you know, of course I don't have personal experience, but people describe the whole middle section of Moby Dick as having, you know, being all about the anatomy of a whale, and that's all it is, and it's boring. It's more like there are occasional 1 or 2 page sections of this book that go into a lot of biology stuff that just doesn't really matter that much, and you can skim it, and then it's fine. And then it goes right on to the next thing. Another thing about the book is that the plot isn't necessarily the strongest aspect of the book, as it's more about the exploration of the world, the 20,000 leagues that are traveled, and the exploration of the characters of the journey itself, kind of their experience of it. It's more what the book is about rather than telling, you know, like this is the point of the story. It's more about the wonder and the exploration of it. There are also certain aspects of the book that seem a little bit far-fetched, especially if you read it at the time that, you know, it was published, which of course nobody watching this video did, but it's crazy how good of a prediction this book was for submarines back when people thought that submarines were still impossible. So thinking about it in the context of when it was written also has that aspect to it as well. It's really, really, really crazy, but even then, there are still some other elements that even today seem far-fetched. But, you know, that's kind of the point of science fiction in general, though I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing, but you read this book expecting for it to be completely realistic. I don't know why you're reading science fiction if you're doing that, but I really enjoyed what the book was doing nonetheless. In terms of the ugly, I kind of hinted at this actually with one of my other comments. This book doesn't go 20,000 leagues deep into the sea because that's literally impossible. The earth isn't big enough, that oceans aren't deep enough for that to be possible. It just means 20,000 leagues worth of distance traveled from one point to another. I heard a couple readers when we did a read along of this in January 2023 that a couple people were a little bit disappointed in the fact that it wasn't, you know, a literal like 20,000 leagues straight down into the sea at any point of the story. It's more just the travels around the world under the sea, and the eventual distance of that travel equals 20,000 leagues by the end of the story, which, you know, I get why people could have that wrong interpretation of the title, because even I did for a lot of my life. But yeah, that is really the only thing that I would say fits in the ugly. In terms of the recommendation, I would personally say absolutely give it a try. Some others weren't so hot on it in the read along as I was, but if the tone of the book sells it for you by a quarter of the way through or so, you're probably going to overall love this book like I did. And admittedly, the second quarter of it is probably, well, the second quarter and the third quarter are probably the worst parts of it. The first half is really good. The last third of it is really good, but there is a point in the middle that lulls maybe just a little bit more than it should. But either way, I would say give it a shot. And if the tone and the vibes of the story are working for you, then the book overall is probably going to work for you. It seemed like most of the people who didn't really love it too much were just because they didn't feel like they were super connected to everything. But if you're really connected to the tone and you really like the way that the main character is exploring all of this, it might totally work for you. It's a personal favorite of mine because of that, but I could see why it maybe wouldn't work for everybody. Like I say, give it a try. If it's working for you, fantastic. If it's not working for you, maybe it's just not for you. And then you can decide what to do from there based off of your own experiences and your own ideas of what is worth DNFing or not. At the very end of this review, I'm just going to go ahead and say, like I did when I was reading the book itself, I'm really mad at myself for not finishing this book after 8th grade. And part of the story for that actually goes down to, well, I checked it out from the high school library and I was reading it. I really enjoyed the first half overall. And then it was the end of the school year and it was like, okay, well, I have to return the book now. And I did. Actually, the librarian at that point told me that I could keep it over the summer and return it at the beginning of the school year if I wanted. And I was like, no, I was more of the lawful good kind of person back then. I was like, no, I'm going to return it anyway. And then I got this copy of the book, same translation, for Christmas that year. And then I proceeded to still never continue with the book. I tried a couple times, but just didn't get there. And that was part of my not reading phase in general. But yeah, I'm upset at myself for not finishing this book the first time around because I was enjoying it then. And I'm sure I still would have loved it if I finished it just like I loved it this time around. But thank you for watching this video. If you did, I really appreciate you. I have no clue what the next video is going to be because I have no clue what episode of the Book Binge this is, but I'll see you in the next video regardless.